Hey guys, welcome to yet another video on my channel, Balloon Head Productions. I'm your host as usual. My name is Marcelo Nostroza, and today I am back for yet another discussion about one of the most coolest space movies that I've seen throughout the course of my life. I grew up with this movie. I owned this movie on VHS, and now I own this movie on digital via iTunes. But as most of you know who have been watching my channel for the last little bit, when I talk about any kind of space movie, I have to have this wonderful, wonderful gentleman by my side being my co-pilot. So with that, I would like to welcome back Dan Decker.
Hey Marcelo, thanks for having me back on. And I just want to echo everything that you said. Though I've had this movie since release because I went to see it in the theater, and I can't remember, did I go see it a lot? But I may have seen it more than once. But I know that I definitely saw it in a movie theater, and it's just an incredible experience, an incredible film, and I am excited to get to talk to you about it because I know we have now, we're stacking them up. We've got a history. You could put together a little bit of a space history canon based on the movies that we've watched so far.
Yeah, that's right. We've actually talked about just in specifics to really tell the folks what we've done so far. We've talked about First Man over 2 years ago, I thought, which is about the Americans landing on the moon for the first time. We've talked about the right
Hmm.
stuff, which is about the program that comes before the before the moon landing, and now we're going to talk about the 1995 film that is all about the crew of Apollo 13 that was supposed to go to the moon because of a malfunction. They never made it to the moon. So I think Dan is 100% right. We have like a little space trilogy thing going on.
And so far, all of these have been rooted in history, though you and I share a passion for alternate space history or science, what they call it, hard science fiction, where it's a fiction story told using grounded science, but something like this that's grounded in a historical event. And you know, hmm, one of the things we spoke about when we started talking about wanting to, Apollo 13 in particular, is if you know how it turns out, they still manage to fill it with a level of suspense where you question still whether is it going to turn out, according to history, or is it going to be even more disaster. And that's a hard thing to do when it comes to a historical drama.
Ron Howard and his writer or his writers of this film do a great job of building up tension and putting the audience into the headspace of the astronauts who are dealing with this problem when they go up in the spacecraft for the first time. The first thing that happens is they have one of their main rocket engines. I believe it's rocket engine number 5. They have that false start, so that sort of gives them a false sense
Mhm.
of security, thinking that that's going to be the only problem that they that they had to face during this flight. But that couldn't be far from the truth, unfortunately.
In case our viewers aren't familiar, um, set us up for what Apollo 13. It covers the story of the astronauts Jim Lovell and crew um, on this almost misadventure, based off of like several of the things we've covered. It's based off of a book written by Jim Lovell called Lost Moon that kind of recounted that story and was dramatized. And as you said, the way the writers are able to pull that drama and that tension, you look back and it's like kind of they struck gold with the cast that they were able to put together. We had Tom Hanks and Gary Sinise and Ed Harris, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, you know what? I think that you are absolutely right. The cast that Ron Howard and Brian Grazer were supposed to get, that's the producer of this film, was absolutely phenomenal. And and it just shows you that from the outset, Brian Grazer and Ron Howard took this film seriously, and they wanted to get the best people that they could to portray these amazing characters from reality, and they just did a bang up job in my mind. From my estimation, the thing that I really like about this film is that it starts out with a voiceover, and the voiceover basically explains the John F. Kennedy's great speech, in that,
Hmm.
before the end of the decade, he wanted men to fire the moon. But while that is happening, we are actually watching the death of three astronauts as they go into the spacecraft to do a plugs out test. But I really love how Ron Howard and the writers of this film started out this movie by framing it with that tragedy to start out first, and then shifting to, I believe, 6 months later, and shifting to the night that Neil and Buzz land on the moon. And that's where we pick up with Jim Lovell.
That moment in our space flight history, the tragedy of Apollo 1. It's always an anchor point in these stories of early American space flight, because it is the first time that we lost these any astronauts to, and unfortunately it test on the ground, right? But for a story like this, where here comes another incident that could have resulted in a very similar fate, um, but we have still had the tenacity to overcome, uh, and you kind of keep in mind they frame the telling of this story, in the story itself through the media. Everyone seems to be disinterested now. This is Apollo 13. We landed on the moon with Apollo 11, so there's only been one intermittent space flight back to the moon, and already the public is disinterested in flying to the moon. You and I can't relate to that. I don't know that I would be bored of us ever going to the moon. You know what I'm saying? It disappoints me that I wasn't born in a time when I could have seen this, because here we are, and it only became interesting to the public because of the incident that happens.
I think human culture, for a large part, once once humankind accomplishes a goal, like no matter what it is, humankind becomes disinterested in a lot of things really, really quickly. And despite how earth shattering it is that we landed three people on the moon, most people after that happened, they're like, okay, what's next? And and
Right.
most people aren't enthused by doing something that we've already done. They want to see something else. They want to see the bar get raised a little higher, so to speak,
Right.
which I don't agree with, because I'm saying, hey, we went to the moon one time, why not do it again?
Well, and hopefully you and I will see a return to that in our lifetimes, as it seems to be a goal that they're pushing towards. Recent, it was Aries tests that they've done. I've probably mentioned this before. When I was young, fifth, sixth grade, I wrote to I sent a letter to all of the NASA institutions around the United States. Ones in Texas and California, and Washington D.C., Florida, and they sent me just folders full of stuff. I knew about this story my entire life, and when I learned that they were going to make this movie, I got excited. And then when Tom Hanks was cast as Jim Lovell, he was on a run. Tom Hanks hosted a whole series of shows. It was like an anthology series on HBO called From the Earth to the Moon. It was exciting, and like I said, they were able to holding your attention when you know what's going to happen, especially for me, just incredible. Not just the storytelling, but they broke a lot of ground in special effects too.
From my personal point of view, when I saw this movie as a kid, I didn't. I actually wasn't aware of the actual real story. I just thought it was something
Oh wow!
cool that that Hollywood, the big the big bad machine, came up with. I wasn't aware, so I wasn't savvy enough until later on in my life, when I got interested in everything having to do with space, because I got sort of addicted onto BSG. I fell back in love with Star Trek, and all that sort of came back around. Um, but one thing in particular that I really, really like about the opening sequence of this film, when the Lovells are having a party to celebrate Neil and Buzz's a great historic moment when they actually land on the moon that we've talked about in my First Man
Hmm.
review. The moment when they're about to step foot on the moon, Ron Howard does something very very interesting. He has all the main cast, all the actors huddled around this TV, and he just focuses in on Jim Lovell or Tom Hanks. And as it's happening, you see his face, and it's almost like he's angry
Hmm.
that this is happening right now. It's like, God damn it, I wanted to be first. And he
Yep.
just he just has this look of he's excited, but it's like he's indifferent, so to speak. So what did you think about that directorial choice and that acting by Tom Hanks in that moment?
Well, as far as conveying that, I think anyone in the program who would have had the opportunity to be in Neil's position, to be the first person, the first American, the first person ever in human history to set foot on a foreign body outside of our own Earth. You know, Knowing that you were in the running just as much as anyone and seeing it happen. Jim had commanded Apollo 8. There's something particular about Apollo 8 that makes it all the more interesting. It has something to do with the tests they were doing and having a chance almost to land on the moon.
Tom Hanks's character Jim Lovell has a line in the movie where he says, "On Apollo 8, we were just eight nautical miles off."
Your experience, not knowing in the moment that the story was historical, that's awesome. Because that's got to be mind blowing as a kid to see that and just be like, what?
Yeah, no, it physically scared the shit out of me because I was so enraptured by what I was seeing, and I was so unconcerned for these characters, and I was on the edge of my seat. And even now, knowing the story and understanding that, look, shit's about to go down, but I know how the story's going to end. Even knowing that, every time I watch this movie, and I watch it maybe twice a year, even now, every time I watch it, I Ron Howard and the writer of this film have a unique ability to just draw you in and to just keep you there and to keep you in suspense, even though you know exactly what the hell is going to happen. One thing that really drove me crazy throughout the course of this film, and you'll have to let me know what you thought about this guy. You mentioned the way that the media viewed this trip to the moon. They viewed it as unnecessary because essentially to them we already accomplished our goal by beating the Russians to the moon.
Exactly.
So the media consultant for NASA, that guy pissed me the fuck off. Like I can't stand that guy. Every time I see him, I want to hit him.
That's what do they say that he's got an incredibly punchable face.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I know, no disrespect the actor because the actor, look, he's probably a wonderful person, but the character that he plays and the way that he was written, I'm like, God damn it, I just want to hit you right now. I don't know why.
Right. Well, and that is something that these films, as we've watched them, they've all consistently been portrayed the media as that pushy, almost well, an antagonistic way, because that's how it was very sensationalized then through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and how they tried to shield Mrs. Lovell from the fact that folks weren't interested in her husband going to the moon because it was a very proud moment for her. And to know that everyone was disinterested in it, not telling them that no one was watching, and things like that, I think to keep their spirits up is a very interesting choice from NASA's perspective, I think, too. But things get interesting.
I almost have to kind of disagree with you there just a little bit in reference to Marianne's in reference to her being proud of her husband going
Hmm.
to the moon again. I really, really got the sense that she was happy for her husband at the start, but once she understood the schedule and once she understood the demands that he was going to have to go through until launch day. I think that she really felt a sense of, oh my God, my husband is going into space again, and this could be the time that he dies. The reason why I
Well, and
say
she
that,
has this dream
right?
too.
Yes. The reason why I say that is because there's two main instances, or actually there's three main instances in the film when this happens. First when Jim Lovell or Tom Hanks gets informed that his prime crew is getting bumped up, his backup crew is getting bumped up and pushed up to the front of the line, to the Farmore Highlands as they put it, which is really cool. When he
Right.
comes home, he's all excited, as he should be. But Marilyn makes this remark before he leaves the house. She goes, "Why number 13? Why did it have to be 13?" And he goes, and Jim Lovell
Oh, right. Yeah.
sarcast- sarcastically goes, "Oh, it comes after 12, hun." Like Jim Lovell is so excited that he doesn't really see the irony of having his spaceship called Apollo 13.
The triskaidekaphobia, the fear of the number 13. If you subscribe to that superstition, it almost paints the picture for itself, and it's hard to it's as a historical observer, it's hard not to see the irony,
Right.
right? You're like, well, of course something went wrong, but at the same time you're like, well, there's no guarantee something would have gone wrong.
The other instance that really screams to me, besides that horrible dream that she had, the other instance is when they're going to a function and they're driving in the car, and Marilyn says that the children's school schedule is kind of full. Jim's mother has just had a medical issue. She's just had a stroke. She's in a home, and Marilyn
Mhm.
says, "I'm thinking about not going to the launch." And you could just see that Tom Hanks's character, Jim Lovell, is completely destroyed, and he says, "Well, you're gonna miss a hell of a show." I feel that she was excited for her husband for a millisecond until she started to really think about it and understand what could possibly go wrong.
Because it meant a lot of work for her, because okay, well, this it disrupts this schedule and that schedule, and it's just easier if I don't go.
What do you think of actually the scenes of the astronauts doing the practice runs to to line up the spaceship with the limb? I found those to be really interesting, and the main reason why I found those to be interesting is because you get to see the secondhand nature that Jim, Fredo, and Ken Mattingly have with each other, and it's
Hmm.
wonderful how their secondhand works, and I really enjoy. Every time I watch this movie, I keep thinking to myself, "God damn it! I mean, I know what happened. I know that Ken had to stay behind, and I but I'm like
Right.
but I'm like, what if he didn't? If he did, if that stupid doctor didn't come up with that fucking bad diagnosis, they possibly could have died. Because if Ken was in space, who the hell would have figured out how to get up how to fix the guidance computer? So
Exactly.
I always think to myself, it would have been cool to see Ken be able to go up in space, but he needed to be down here. So what did you think about all those scenes in particular?
These kinds of things fascinate me because I try to put myself in those positions, and something about the Apollo spacecraft that has always just awestruck me is the amount of controls and buttons and switches, and the panels are just littered with information, little LED screens, and like you said, watching these astronauts work, it's like a dance. And that was part of Jim's point was, you can't just disrupt the team. We're this orchestrated maneuver, but in the practical sense, in the grounded sense, real world of it, these simulators for the time that they were built, uh, incredible technology that we had to train these astronauts, and these docking procedures and things like that. They fascinate me to this day. But like you said, the way that they're just so well orchestrated to work together in that environment. What I will say is, to your point, had he gone up as intended, I think it could have ended more poorly, because his role down here after being grounded, to help figure out how to bring the ship back up, his investment in that. and him knowing what his crew needs to do because he was there, I think probably contributed to their success in a way that no one else could had he been on the ship.
I couldn't agree with you even more. The fact that the universe wanted Ken to stay down here, him staying
Hmm.
down here in my mind saved the ship. Because if he
Yeah,
was up
exactly.
there, it could have been a disaster for NASA. Not
Yep.
not to mention the world, but just NASA itself. I think if the crew of Apollo 13 died in space, I think that the president at the time, Richard Nixon, probably would have found some loopholes to shuttle NASA and to
Yep.
completely shut down the program.
Yep. Absolutely. But and instead, we get as they say, NASA's most successful failure.
My favorite performance in the film is Gary Sinise's performance because I just love what he does with the character of Ken
I
Mattingly and the
love
way
Gary
that,
Sinise and everything.
yes, I love that man. Um, and the way that he goes about his character development is just great. But the guy that I think doesn't get enough love, and the guy that gets picked on a lot throughout the course of this movie, like tremendously, is Jack Swigert, played by Kevin Bacon, because
Oh yeah, yeah.
because he constantly gets treated like he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and I'm like, dude, he's a fucking
He's an
pilot.
astronaut. Yeah, he's an astronaut. He knows something. From all accounts, as far as like uh, a lot of the drama in within the amongst the three astronauts in the capsule
Didn't happen.
is more, yeah, is more dramatized for our benefit than it's not inaccurate. People, look, they're freezing, they're in space, they're tired, they haven't eaten, one of them is sick, it's bad. But the treatment wasn't historically what it was, but it makes for good storytelling.
Yeah,
Someone has to be kind of the scapegoat because he was his following procedure to stir the tanks because the oxygen's stored in a liquid state because you get a lot more oxygen that way, and when they went to stir that tank, the fan again. I don't know what it is with these contractors and terrible wiring, but the fan has a short in it, blew a hole in the side of the spacecraft of the Odyssey module, and the problem with that is not only were these tanks for propellant, but also last time I checked, humans need something oxygen to breathe.
but you bring up a great point, right? What NASA is doing and what they did first flight to the moon, these individuals are doing unbelievable things, but if they make one mistake, somebody could die. And it's and
Exactly.
it's and it's really unbelievable to me that the contractor that they get to make all this equipment was so, I mean, look, mistakes happen. I'm not above saying, okay, a mistake was made, it wasn't your fault, but it still kind of is your fault because if you didn't stick that part in there, this would have never happened. But what I'm trying to get at here is that it's unbelievable to me that an operation this big keeps having these little issues that cause catastrophic things to happen. First, you and I have mentioned it several times, the plugged out test. That should have never happened.
We knew then that that was a bad idea because we don't put pure oxygen in the scuba tanks,
No, of course not.
and our atmosphere is not pure oxygen. But this, and this we had presumably learned from this, but all Jack did was follow procedure when he
Stir the
stirred
tanks.
that tank. It was going to happen. It was going to happen. It wasn't his fault. He just made it happen because that was what he was supposed to do. The machine itself was not supposed to do what it did, so nothing was his fault.
No, and to move to your point, there is one fantastic scene when all three astronauts are on the limb, right? And at this point, their nerves are fried, and they basically want to bounce off the fucking walls and kill each other. And I love what Jim Lovell says to Fred Hayes, who's actually just taking out all of his frustration on Jack. He's saying that Jack didn't look at the gauges properly. He's saying that he acted improperly by steering the tanks and all that shit. And Jim Lovell says something very interesting. He says, "Listen, if I'm in the seat when the call comes, I'm the guy that stirs the tanks."
Yep.
So he is basically deflecting Fred Hayes's you know blame game on poor Jack Swagger, because he's right. It wasn't his fault, and he did what Mission Control told him to do in the first place.
You mentioned the limb, and part of this procedure, part of what they had to do to survive after this incident, because the oxygen is part of the system. Not only does it provide the way it works is, it interacts with a fuel cell and it provides electricity, produces that electricity, it releases breathable air and potable water, so that's they're drinking water, they're breathing air. Everything about what they need for that ship to operate is contained in those oxygen tanks that are now gone. And so, they're to a point where they can't generate electricity for the spacecraft. The only way that they're going to be able to power it is on the batteries that already have what charge they have. So they have to immediately start shutting down this ship and transferring themselves into the lunar module as a lifeboat. There's no air circulation. It's no wonder tensions are high. But you're absolutely right. Jim points out what we all need to know is that it wasn't his fault. The system was built that way.
Every part of the spacecraft is built by separate people. I'm thinking at that moment, I'm thinking, guys, wouldn't it just be a good idea to hire one person to build all the fucking parts? If you subcontract all parts out to different people, lower cost. So, but I'm like, lower cost isn't acceptable. You are sending people into space.
You would think that a cohesive design strategy would make for the safest way to the moon, but I gotta say too, the craft held up as best as anyone. I mean, better than it could have been so much worse. I mean, because essentially, oxygen being ignited in space is all bad in all the ways. The damage done to the spacecraft wasn't just to the service module; it generates everything we just mentioned. But that sets what sits atop the service module is the command module, the actual spacecraft, and in between those two things are the heat shield. It was like one thing leads to another, leads to another. But one of the best montages in the film, I love there's several, but I love the engineers getting together with the box of scraps. I need this to go to that, and we have X amount of time to do it. And just like anything, duct tape saves the day. And then the number of times that Ken goes into the simulator to get the power up sequence right, so that when they don't overdraw the battery when they go to power the system up. And just a quick, electrical lesson. The concern is if you turn the systems on in the wrong order, you're going to pull too many amps and drain the battery too fast before that it can deliver enough power to turn everything on. You have to turn things on in the right order so that you don't zap all the power.
Actually, my favorite line in the movie is when Ken Manley is in the simulator and John is talking to him and he goes, "The power sequence is good, but we just need a little bit we we just need a little bit more." And Ken goes, "God damn it, John, what is it? 3 or 4?" And he goes, "It's 4." Right?
Yeah.
And that's when, Ken has this eureka moment. He goes, 4 amps. Where the hell are we gonna get 4 amps? And he says, why don't I just take power from a system that from a system that has a little bit of power left and reverse the power? I mean, he said we're gonna lose a little bit in the transfer, but we'll get the power that we need. So
Yep.
I just love that sequence.
It just shows that there's a reason that NASA built the astronaut corps the way that they did. Fly by the seat of their pants, essentially strapping talking monkeys to bottle rockets in the early days of NASA to these scientist astronauts. I mean, just to kind of illustrate the difference in two generations. You had the Mercury, the Gemini, and now the Apollo astronauts. Buzz Aldrin developed orbital mechanics at MIT. I mean, Alan Shepard did not. So, not that he wasn't a smart man, but that's why we have these people, astronauts that are going to go to the moon, do these lunar missions, because they can solve these problems. They know why, they know the math behind how this works, because they are also scientists themselves. And if you had other folks in there, some of the early astronauts would have been able to fly the Eagle to the moon, but they might not have been as capable of solving these kinds of problems in the moment.
You bring up another interesting point saying that, and I kept thinking to myself while I was watching this film today in preparation for this discussion, if Neil was in this situation instead of Jim Lovell, do you think that Neil could have figured out the power up sequence that Ken figured out on the ground? I'm like, I don't think so, because
I don't know.
Neil
Yeah,
was a pilot. He wasn't a
yeah.
mathematician.
Buzz could have,
Possibly.
but Neil, you're right. Yeah, and that's and again, that points back to had Ken been on board, would he have been able to, or known, because they're thinking in the situations that they're in, right? So their circumstances are dictating their thought processes. So you're getting the best out of all of them from where they are in the moment.
I really think that as awful as this situation was, I think what needed to happen actually happened, and I think, look, I'm not some sort of Buddha, but I do believe that the universe allowed Ken not to go because, again, I sound like a guy from space right now, because because in some higher power the universe knew that this was going to happen.
And it makes, the universe loves a good story. It's one of those when that is actually historically based. It just it can, it itself highlights a different way, a different way that humans are clever, and can accomplish great things amidst a terrible circumstance. In the shadow of having just accomplished, quite possibly the most phenomenal achievement to date that humankind has managed. Landing on the moon initially, and then continuing. There were what, four more missions, so we didn't stop just because of this.
Yeah, were there four? Like, you have to help me there.
Yeah, I think Apollo 17 was the last one. Apollo 18 is in a museum.
Oh, wow, okay. I really think that going back to the moon isn't the next thing for the astronaut program. I think the next thing that we have to do to capture the imagination of the world again, we got to go to Mars.
Oh, absolutely. That is such a grand challenge.
And I think, look, I understand that not too many people like this guy. I get that. I get that, but I don't. I I'm not gonna say I like him, but I like his vision, and I like his money. I think
Right.
I think that the guy that's gonna help us get to the moon, get to Mars, is gonna be Elon Musk.
Well, I mean, he's the only one trying in any serious way. It's okay to joke about the you call it disaster or not, when Spaceship One or Starship One launched and things didn't go
Blew up.
well. They learned what they wanted to learn.
Yeah,
They learned what they felt that if you conduct a test and you get the data you need to learn the thing that you wanted to learn, from that past that point, everything else is bonus. Now, I think everyone involved would have rather have seen it become more of a successful test than it did. But if they don't consider it a failure, learning step for them. And like you said, separating art from the artist, who else is doing it?
Jeff Bezos, his company with Blue Origin, he seems to be more focused on making space travel into a tourist destination.
Look, we've junked it up enough without having too many people up there.
And now you want to make bus tours into space. I don't
I
yeah,
don't think so.
I don't I don't know about that one, but I think, you know what, the biggest challenge that I foresee us the biggest obstacle that I see, when it comes to being able to go to Mars, I believe that we have to figure out how to put people into stasis. Like that, I think is one of our key issues that we have to figure out.
The length of time for the trip and the fact that you have too few people in too small space, it would end poorly probably.
If we want to, organize an expedition to Mars, what about like building a whole space station?
Right. There's an example of that in that show we want to talk about. I think that's a pretty cool idea. And, that would be a good way of doing it because there's plenty of room. And, but yeah, that's honestly the best way to do it. And it's kind of how they, very similar to Passengers, the movie Passengers. It's a kind of a similar, space hotel where everybody's in stasis though, too.
I mean, in my lifetime, I want to see two things. I want to see us land on Mars,
Yep.
and I would like to see a cure for cancer because I have several people in my life who have lost their battle to cancer. So, if I could see land on Mars and the cure for cancer, I'd be set.
That'd be great. I support those goals.
What are some of your favorite scenes or moments from this magnificent film?
You know, I love Tom Hanks' delivery of the iconic line of Houston, we've had a problem. It just never gets old. The way he and from all accounts, Jim was like this himself, but the way he kind of delivers that, oh, we need a point of reference in order for you to fly home, and he's like, I think I found one, and it's the Earth, and but some of my favorite stuff about it are the practical effects, the fact that they, some of it is harness work, but they actually went into the NASA parabolic airplane allows them to experience weightlessness for several seconds, and they would film in like 20 and 30-second chunks and get their an actual weightless experience, which is just that's incredible commitment to good filmmaking.
My favorite, well, I have two favorite scenes in the entire film. One scene is when Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes sit down with Ken Manley, and they try to tell him that you're not going to the moon because you have the chicken pox per se.
Yeah, yeah.
And I absolutely love the scene that comes right before that, because the scene that comes right before that is is Jack Swigert macking on some girl in a hotel room. He gets the call, and he's just, I have to answer because I'm on the backup crew. The backup crew does the guest list. They do all this shit. And I gotta answer the phone. He goes and answers the phone. They tell him that he's gonna replace Ken Mangley, and Kevin Bacon's reaction is just so like, yeah, right. And then
Oh yeah.
it immediately cuts to Gary Sinise as Ken Mangley sitting in the chair looking absolutely heartbroken, and I'm like, that's one of the best cuts ever. It's just so great.
Oh yeah. Yep. That's some good emotional storytelling.
The other scenes that I like very much is when they're putting the spacesuits on the astronauts for the first time, and they're actually shaving Lubbo's chest, and during that exchange, he goes, where did Gunter go? Like, he just says this like, I don't know if it's Russian, but he says it in such a sarcastic and interesting way. I just love it. Um, lastly, when they're all being put into the spacecraft, I love the way that the NASA engineers secure them into their
Oh,
seats.
but stepping into the
Yeah,
shoulders.
yeah, they
Yeah.
gotta step on their shoulders, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, you
Oh,
guys could have figured out an easier way to do this. Yeah, it's gotta be really uncomfortable, and also you have to understand that the orientation of the film looks like they're sitting, but they're really not. They're all laying
yeah.
down.
You're leaning back upside down almost.
Yeah. Also, I love the moment when the engineer secures Lovell to the captain's seat in the center, and he goes, "Jim, you're all set." And then um, Ron Howard just shows a shot of Jim looking up, and you can see him. Uh, you can see him just look up and shake the guy's hand who just strapped him in. It
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that is my favorite scene or my favorite moment of the entire film, and I just think that is absolutely wonderful. There's one more thing that I would like to talk about. What do you think about Ed Harris as Gene Kranz in this movie?
Ed Harris is underrated. He is the best part of any movie he's in, and he portrays Gene
So
Kranz
well.
so well. He looks the part. He has the mannerisms down, and Gene's book "Failure Is Not an Option" is an excellent read. If you're interested in what it was like to get mission control in shape and what it was like through these, it covers the several of the space travel tragedies we've had through the Challenger incident. Because Gene's long since been retired and probably passed by this point, but that was an excellent book. Highly recommend. But Ed Harris just knocks it out of the park. Fantastic performance.
My favorite moment of Ed Harris doing Gene Kranz is that moment when it's towards the end of the movie when the astronauts are getting kind of concerned about reentry, and NASA is trying to just let Ken and the other guy work shit out because they know that they're running out of time, but they don't have anything for the astronauts. And Ed Harris as Gene Kranz goes over to, I think it's Deke Slayton and the other guy. I can't remember the other guy's
Mm-hmm.
name. He goes, "Listen, I don't need the Bible. I just want to give these guys something. So just give me something." The other guy says, not Deke Slayton. The other guy says, "I'll go down to the simulator to get an estimate." And he goes, "God damn it! I don't want an estimate. I want the damn procedures now." I just absolutely love that moment, and I also love his unshaking faith that this was going to work. Look, he might have
Yep.
been terrified, but the fact that he didn't show it, I think was
Yep.
great.
No, if you, like I said, folks, if you have any interest at all, you read that book. It's his autobiography, and you'll understand why he was in the position that he was in for so long. And just like always, there. I don't know how many awards Ed Harris has been nominated for through his career, but and he didn't win all of them, and that's a shame.
All right, Dan, we have come to the end of our wonderful conversation here. But before we go, I just want to say thank you again for joining me to talk about this fantastic film.
It's always my pleasure to be here. I will talk space movies with you all the time.
Awesome. And if the good folks at home want to find you and find out what you're up to, what will be the best place for them to do that on?
You can find me on Twitter, and the handle is DANDECKR. And from there, you can see all of the links to all the other stuff I'm doing. Got a weekly YouTube role play game between D&D on one side and Warhammer Fantasy 4 5th edition on the other. So those links will be available on my Twitter page as well.
And guys, if you want to find me and all my misadventures online, the best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm at CreekFanatic88. But I'd like to thank you for tuning in for this discussion. And as I often say, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.